Yo, what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy B, and today we are going to be breaking down for you all of the kingdoms that are at 10 bill power and above for a top 300, and looking at which kingdoms are in which gen pools, so we can give you a breakdown of how many kingdoms there are in each one. And I'm also going to show you a full list as well from data that was pulled on the 14th of November in a top-down format, so you can see the strength of each of these kingdoms and what pool they are in currently. So I hope you guys enjoy this one, because a number of people have been asking me to do this. So as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you throw us up. Thanks. All right, let's get into it. And of course, as always, if you guys would like information on any kind of data services for your Kingdom Alliance players, right, there is a link to the Discord for Hero Scrolls in the pinned comment description down below. Okie dokie. So what we're going to be showing you, let me give a brief intro here. For those of you that have wondered, okay, well, look, I'm in Season of Strife, and I see 4 KvK storylines. Okay, even if you might not have all 4 available to you, there are 4 at the moment. Or you're in pre-war, and or you're again coming in. You finish season 3 and you're in pre-war here, and you're going into Season of Strife, right? Depending on which KvK seasons are available to you and the timeline at which you would be starting versus those that are already in KvK or are about to finish, what gen pool are you in? I'm going to answer that question for you so I can explain, right? At least again, as of the 27th, probably 2.5 hours after reset. Okay, let's show the sheet. Now, this is going to be a little bit different, right? This is kind of my master file, but this is just a copied tab that I have adjusted so you can see. Now, most of you are already familiar with this because I've shown a number of this data already as it pertains to the Gen 2 pool. Now, this is what we're mainly going to be focusing on here is column B, and then we'll be using column D, which is power. Then we have kills, deaths, heals, siege 25, average siege 25 power, and then how many players at 60 mil plus up to 300 mil plus do they have, right? However, that to me is just all extra. The main takeaway here is explaining to you where everyone is right now, because I've heard people that have asked me, boss, well, hey, there's a number of strong kingdoms, but they're not in the main G2 pool. You know, why is that? Or where are they? And could they get back to the G2 pool? These are, I think, really important questions when it comes to answering, well, how much stronger could the G2 pool be? For everyone who understands that in the beginning, when there was mainly one pool, right, that started out, and then eventually there was a second and a third and a fourth and so on and so forth, it started to become noticeable at a certain point in the game's history where the G2 pool was starting to get more and more kingdoms there. Now, part of this was because at times in the beginning, people had to decide between which KvK storylines they wanted to go into. And a couple times at most, you ended up seeing the main KvK pool at the time, which we could just say was the SOS original kingdom pool, started to decide on which storylines they wanted to go in. And this kind of started forming different timelines, along with eventually having more kingdoms that got added into the Season of Strife kingdom KvK pools. And so people had to decide, well, okay, I'm either going to join this KvK storyline or this one, or I'm going to skip. And this is where you started to develop a certain number of kingdoms in a particular pool. And this is where the G2 pool really started to gain traction, because they ended up getting more and more kingdoms that started to join it because they were initially known or started to become well known as the largest kingdom pool. And myself, I could tell you, I was a very big advocate. I wouldn't have cared which gen kingdom KvK pool had the most amount of kingdoms in it. Regardless, I would have still advocated for kingdoms to join whatever the largest pool was. And I still stand by that. For me, it's very simple. The more kingdoms that are in a kingdom pool or a KvK kingdom pool, the more opportunity and the higher percentage chance, even if it doesn't always happen, but the higher percentage chance you will have for more fair and balanced matchups. Now, obviously, it depends on the season. It depends on how the matchmaking is being done. There are some factors here, right? Some asterisks. However, generally speaking, the G2 pool has always had a higher percentage chance to have more fair and balanced matchups than any other gen pool out there. And that's because they have the most amount of kingdoms. So let's go through this now, top down, so I can show you what gen the other kingdoms are in. And then I'm going to read you some stats at the end so you can understand some timelines as well that I'll explain. So I think that probably the biggest one off the bat is going to be Kingdom 40, right? Which is last. We don't care too much about G2 because that's what we're kind of here for. Everyone understands that, right? We want to look at the outliers. Who's not in G2? Right now, remember, we're only going to 10 billion power for a top 300 projection and above. Here, Kingdom 40, being last, sits at a little over 22 billion power. You can see the top 300, right? They got 247 CH25s. Average power here is 90 mil. Right, they got 102 100 mil pluses, and then we have one over 200 mil. Okay. If you look at the 90 mil here, and then you look at some G2s below them, like they're above 283, they're above 554, they're above 345, and they're above 221. Now in power, obviously they're above the rest here. If I'm looking at 100 mil for them, I mean, they're above 554, they're above 345, and I think this is 403. Yeah. And right, so that's probably, that could be close. That looks like maybe that could be 103. Okay, it is, right? So again, it's not as though they're incredibly far off in a sense, but you could argue and say, okay, well, why aren't they in the G2 pool, right? I mean, they're a top 14 kingdom, at least as of the 14th, which is about 2 weeks ago, okay? Now, as always, maybe there's something going on. Maybe there's a certain level of dead weight. We'd have to look at what their PvP engagement stats were from maybe the 11-7 pool as an example, right? So there's some other things that we could take a look at, and maybe there's other things going on there that we don't know. However, we're just kind of going off this on paper. Okay, so next, right? So they're G1, meaning they're in Age of Duality right now within the first 10 KvK groups. That would be SOS 6, 001 up to 010. Okay, then we get to number 3, right? So this is Gen 3. Now, this is the YSS Kingdom. Some of you might be familiar with this because Guns has an account of YSS and he has streamed their Final Zone, a KvK action. And for 357, Gen 3 basically just means that right now they are in pre-war. So they're in SOS pre-war right now, waiting for the next KvK to start. I think their matchmaking goes on December 1st. So in a couple days here is when that's going to kick off. But the first one, and this is a top 24 kingdom, you would argue, why aren't these kingdoms in G2, right? Now, as an example, which I think is kind of funny to look at here, right? If I was, and I don't know if I can, you know what? I'd have to turn this into a grid. Oh, no. I don't have to. You know what? I'm going to sort this a certain way. However, I'll sort this a certain way in a sec so you guys can understand. Because I want to show you, if we look at the top kingdoms from G1, G3, 4, 5, 6, right? Now, and I'll explain 4, 5, and 6 in a bit, right? Because there is a little bit of an asterisk there. But for G3, right, you're looking YSS, 163, they're very close in power. ASI 19, 18, 7. Okay, like this isn't that bad. Like this is pretty close. This is a bill power differential. But then you see a drop here at 17.2. Okay, so that's about 1.5 bill. Okay. And if you look at the ones, it's 22.2, 19.3. That's almost a 3 bill power differential, right? Between 140 and then the 551. And if I look at the next, now it's going 19.3 to 18. It's about a 1.3 bill, right? So a little bit closer, but still a decent drop off. And then you're looking at 1707, 1705. It's again about a bill right there. Okay, 17.2. Let's go a little bit further down. Right now we're at 16.16. Okay, all right, so a little bit more separated. But again, these are about top 50 kingdoms in the game. You could argue, man, the G2 pool could be that much stronger, that much more balanced. The opportunity is now being increased more to have more fair and balanced matchups within the main KvK group, which is G2, right? If these kingdoms were to go there. And then we look at what we have, right, as our first kind of G4, 5, 6, and you're seeing that here for 338, which is JPLS, right? They're 15.88 bill. Now, to explain this, G4 right now is about 28 to 35 days into their KvK currently. Now, that could be Calling of Courage. It could be one of the other seasons, right? It's not Age of Duality. And I don't think there's anyone in Rise of the Dragon right now. So it's either Road to Dawn or Calling of Courage, right? This is where kind of G4, 5, 6 would be. Now, so you understand this, let me scoop my little timeline here. So we have 28 to 35 days into the season is what we have labeled as G4. G5 is 14 days into the season currently. There's 2 of those kingdoms. There's 9 kingdoms that are 28 to 35 days in, and then we have 15 kingdoms that are a day, less than a day in, right? I think they just started at reset. So, you're talking a couple hours at this point as of recording. There are 141 kingdoms at the moment, as of 2 weeks ago, that are over 10 bill plus power. You would think the best thing that could happen would be for these 141 kingdoms to all be in the same gen pool. Like, that to me makes the most sense. Why they haven't just combined all the kingdoms into a single pool and then made it so when people are coming into Season of Strife, they just have to wait for the KvK to finish. And maybe they come up with something to do in the meantime, the devs do, while they wait. But to me, I very much feel like there should just be one main pool. And the important part here is so the timeline is the same. Now, if you want to have multiple different KvK storylines, I'm not really a fan of that. I like more of the thing of like, okay, everyone goes into the newest season. And if there's a new KvK storyline that comes out, everyone goes into the new one. And then the next time around, if there's not a new KvK storyline at that point, then you rotate it, right? Or you do it where all the kingdoms have to vote. And then whichever one gets the most votes, that's the one everyone goes into. And I say that because it's about creating the most PvP and fun opportunity for everyone involved. And regardless of if you agree with the KvK storyline or a map or not, the fact is that you won't get any action if you end up having the existing pool split off into into 2 or more KvK storylines. The more splitting off you get, the less balance that you have available to you. And if you get into a KvK, which we've seen multiple times, where the matchups are not balanced, it leads to a poor KvK season. It leads to low participation, low PvP engagement. And these are the things we're trying to avoid. We're trying to look at the bigger picture here, right? So those are some of the stuff. Okay. Now, I should add, as an important note, the gens that I am labeling as 4, 5, and 6 could all very well just be G4. And like they've done with other pools before, when a main pool gets out, sometimes they will wait to start the next KvK until the other kingdoms that are in a later timeline catch up. Now, this doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. And we have seen moments of this in COD's history. So it very well could happen where G4 gets out and then they wait 2 weeks to start the next KvK timeline, which would allow, in this case, G5, that's listed as 5, to catch up and combine with 4. Now, would they maybe wait a month or so because that's what they'd have to do in order to mix 4, 5, and 6? Maybe. I think it's more likely at most that they would probably wait the 2 weeks and combine 4 and 5, unless they just don't care at that point and they decide just to go, right? I'll try and keep an eye on that to see what they do for G4, if it's just going to auto start or if they're going to wait the 2 weeks for G5 to catch up, or if G4 goes in and maybe they and then they wait for G5 to get out of KvK and they wait for G6 to catch up, and then they do a G5 G6 combination. So we'll see how that plays out. But at the moment, whether you want to refer to this as 6 gen pools or 6 KvK different timelines, that's another way to look at it as well. So let's continue, right? I digress. So JPLS first, G6 in this case, right? So they just started at reset today going into the 28th in-game time. It's 27th for me. Then we look at the first 5, which would be 342, right? That's OR 14.67 billion. Okay. Then we look at where's the first 4, right? Because that's important. So the first 4 is here. This would be 611 SOV. And so in this one, right, remember, because G3 is pre-war, G4, they're like between 28 and 35 days in from what I've estimated so far. They're at 12.52 bill. Okay. There's a few more here that are G4 as well. Now, this one is 35 days compared to 20. You see some notes here, right? So if there's a little thing here at the top right corner, that means it's 35 days. The other ones are 28 days. And then, so there's a few here. We continue our way down, and you'll see as we get to the end, right? And I did this just for kind of good measure, but there's, 140 to 140, right? That are basically at 10 bill plus. And again, as of 2 weeks ago. So this just kind of shows you where everyone is right now. And like I said, I think for me, obviously the most impactful ones are the ones that are the strongest kingdoms that are not in the G2 pool. My hope and belief is that more and more kingdoms will just work their way to the G2 pool, because I just think that there's a lot more pros than there are cons for doing so. There's a lot more overall benefits than not. And, because I always find it funny when people tell me and they say, oh, well, we're rebuilding or we're doing this or that. The problem is that if you're in one of those situations where you're rebuilding or you need to do some heavy trimming, keep in mind, you might only need to do that for that upcoming KvK or where it's going to affect you in that upcoming KvK. It will then be more difficult for you to work your way back to G2 because it may take longer than 1 KvK season's worth of time after you have done your initial skip. Now, you could do the other approach where you stay in the G2 pool, but you sign up for a different KvK storyline. Okay. Now, the challenge with this is that when you do something like that, you actually have either just as much of a chance, if not more than a chance, to potentially have harder matchups depending on who else goes into that other storyline, right? So you might be thinking, well, okay, we're like a decently strong kingdom. And keep in mind, you could argue this could go either way. But the idea being is that, and I understand, right? It's like if you're 22 bill, but your fighting strength is at 10, to be fair, if I'm just to talk about a solution here, which I think is probably a better, more appropriate way to really approach this, is the way to fix something like this. And again, maybe I should suggest this at some point, is honestly, I think the way that they need to do it is where they allow the kingdoms to register the alliances that they're going to bring in to the KvK. And maybe there's a limit. Maybe they say you can only bring in 5 alliances or 4 or 6, 8, or 10, whatever the number is. And then this way, the management teams in those kingdoms / those alliances are responsible for accepting and or removing players in the alliance. And then once the registration period ends, whichever players are in those registered alliances for the KvK will be registered for the upcoming KvK and are eligible to participate. This to me would make it so much easier, especially for kingdoms that, and if you're talking about solving at least one way to do it, I think this would be one of the best ways to do it at the moment from what I can think of currently. Because how many kingdoms have we seen where they know people are going to migrate out, or they realize that they need to do some trimming, but they can't like auto kick enough people or auto discharge or immediate instant discharge enough people out of the kingdom in time to meet the registration deadline, or for whatever number of reason it might be, right? Or some people are iffy and they're not sure if they're going to be staying or leaving, or if they're going to participate this season or take a season off, whatever it may be. Being able to allow the kingdoms to register their power, their true fighting power that they're going to go into the KvK with, to me, would just solve so much. So anyways, I guess I'll leave it there. And probably should have just started it there before I was trying to get into my last point. I'd love to know your thoughts on this one. Does this help at all? Is it nice to be able to visually see where all the kingdoms are, what the timelines are, who isn't in the main KvK gen pool versus who is? Like I said, this isn't to shun anyone or to like for shame people. Again, some people might have their own reasons, right, for why they're not in the pool, or for why they didn't register for the majority KvK storyline that people registered for. Number of reasons. But what I'm saying is that instead of, like obviously shaming people, right? I think, like I was saying at my last point, the COD team should just implement something that makes it easier for these people to stay in the main biggest KvK pool, gen pool, and then still register for the KvK storyline that the majority of people are registering for, and not feel like they're going in inflated. Like they're going in with a higher punching power than what they actually are anticipating. And it gives them a little bit more control in their kind of KvK destiny, if you will. So those are just my thoughts. I'd love to know what you guys think on what we showed today, on my last point that I brought up, and obviously, of course, anything in between. Let me know in the comments down below. That is going to be it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.